Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Iron Culture. It is me, your regular, full-time, totally normal host, Eric Trexler, joined tonight by a not normal, not full-time, not regular host, and that would be the Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple. Lauren, how are we doing tonight?
Well, it's disappointing that the good Dr. Eric Helms has once again abandoned the community, but I'm happy to step in.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
he abandoned this show, and he also, I have it on good authority, he no longer considers himself part of the broader culture of iron. I was talking to him. He said bodybuilding, there's just too much pageantry, and he thinks it's kind of like, his words were glorified beauty pageant, which I disagreed with. I thought that was inappropriate. He said Olympic weightlifting is too complicated, a lot of movement going on. And he said powerlifting, call me when you can do 3 rather than 1. So, yeah, so he really went kind of scorched earth in a private conversation that he and I had in confidence. So he's out of the iron culture. And I don't know, maybe he'll be on the show again. I haven't heard from the guy, so we'll see. But for now, this whole thing with him has made me really start to value the rock solid partnerships that I can really rely on in my life. And Lauren, that reminds me, we at the Mass Research Review have a partnership with Elite FTS. This is a new partnership. If you go to the Elite FTS website, elitefts.com, you can use the code MRR10 for 10% off most of the products they have over there. And Lauren, I need to come clean. The first time we did a read of this advertisement copy for this new partnership with Elite FTS, I said things that were misleading. I said things that were false, but I said things that were not a lie. Okay, so what I said was, when I was in college, like we're talking like sometime around probably like between 2009 and 2011, I knew Elite FTS was the big dog in town when it came to durable powerlifting equipment. So I got wrist wraps and straps for my various lifting needs. And the last time we talked about this on the show, I mentioned that they were so durable that they basically, I lost them in a move before I could actually break them down. So they lasted an entire cycle of me just trying to not lose them. But I did some digging. That didn't sit right with me, and I said, I'm a responsible owner of gym gear. And folks, I'm happy to say that right here, I have my Elite FTS. This is after a good, I don't know, probably 13 to 15 years of use. They're still completely functional. I've got my wrist wraps with the reinforced middle part here. You can see a little bit of fraying, but no issue with the actual integrity of the strap. And again, we're talking about a decade and a half of extremely reckless and irresponsible use. And I even still have, folks, my wrist wraps. And again, these are, you can see the love, you can see the 15 years of irregular use that I put them through. And again, they are still completely functional. So if you want to have a good pair of wrist wraps or straps for the next 15 years, and who knows, maybe I'll get another 15 out of them, head over to elitefts.com and use the code MRR10, stands for Mass Research Review 10, for 10% off your order. All right, Lauren, I just hyped up Elite FTS. I just hyped up my ability to find things in my closet. Now I want to hype up you. You are, as I put it recently on our podcast, Front Page Fitness, you are a social media darling. You have had a meteoric rise, and you are essentially a trendsetter in the world of online fitness social media stuff. And so what I wanted to do with this episode is not mimic the structure of our podcast, but I wanted to kind of borrow it to some extent. So for those who don't know, first of all, shame on you, but we welcome you anyway. Front Page Fitness, Lauren and I, we've done, we're on episode 23 is our next one that we're going to record. So this has been going on for several months now, and we do a weekly episode, and basically Lauren does a tremendous amount of really disturbing homework. She finds some of the worst of health and fitness and wellness content online, and we talk about what's in the headlines that week. So we usually go through, I don't know, maybe 3 to 5 topics per episode. It is not super heavy, nitty gritty science talk, But we have a little bit of fun, and when appropriate, we'll also kind of acknowledge what science actually has to offer us on the topic at hand. So what I'm going to do in this episode, what we are going to do is I basically was looking at your Instagram page and just kind of seeing what in the world have you been responding to lately in terms of hot topics and controversies and things of the sort. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you just a random grab bag of questions about topics that you've been yelling at people about on the internet. And I do know for sure it's going to be very creatine heavy. I don't think it'll be only creatine, but Lauren, the first thing that we have to start with, uh, I was mortified because I think it was maybe a text. You sent me something about creatine, and it was a very special form of creatine. Not chemically. Chemically, it was creatine monohydrate. But what was really unique about this creatine monohydrate, first of all, it's for women, and I know that because the packaging is pink. It has a lot of pink on it. So it's a female only creatine. I don't know what would happen if I took it, but so this is for women. And the thing that's cool about it is through some shuttling mechanism I've not yet come to understand. I'm sure you'll explain it to me. This one's for growing your glutes. Is that right?
That's right. And for reducing cellulite.
Oh, yes, I
I
forgot.
forgot.
Yeah, so to me, this was a jarring observation. This was really eye-opening because it's no secret. Like I would consider myself a bit of a generalist. If you follow the stuff I write about in mass, I've really been letting my interests and passions kind of guide me to a variety of topics. But creatine, I mean, that was the topic of my master's thesis research. That was my bread and butter. And so when I saw that and realized that I was 20 years behind the creatine research, I didn't know that there was glute specific, female specific cellulite eliminating creatine. To me, that was a huge wake up call. Like, hey, dude, you can't just keep chasing every new topic that catches your eye. You need to get back to home base and actually basically do some remedial work when it comes to creatine to get back up. So I was hoping maybe you could help explain to me what I missed in the last 20 years of creatine research such that this product exists.
Yeah, so if the listeners aren't following me on Instagram at Dr. Lauren CS1, then once again, shame on them. Listen to Front Page Fitness and follow me. Come on.
Yeah, shame
But
on you,
I
but
do.
you're welcome to join us.
Yeah,
There's still
join us.
time to fix this. Yes.
That's right. The remedy is clear and
Yeah.
fairly easy. Uh, I do a lot of claim evaluation. Some would call it myth busting. And what I see is a lot of recommendations for women specifically across the board. And so I've talked about this a lot, but basically recommendations that somehow now only apply to women, and that could be exercise specific, diet specific, and in this case, supplement specific. And a lot of times when we really dig down, there actually isn't much there. And this is a lot of marketing. And so that is the case with creatine for women. The advertising here is very much like, not your boyfriend's creatine, or like it's not just for bros, or it's not just for athletes. And so there's a big push for the everyday person, and in this case often the midlife perimenopausal woman to start taking creatine. And there's a whole host of claims about what it might do. People rarely mention that you should probably only take it if you're exercising. And these kind of the pink tax, if you will, is often at least double the price. It's definitely packaged in pink. And in some versions, there's a peach on the container, because they've recognized that women
Because of peak
want to
flavor,
grow
right?
their glutes.
Oh, okay. There you
Right.
go.
Yeah. And there's a lot of gummy products as well that are being marketed to women. Sometimes they have another useless ingredient in addition to creatine monohydrate, usually collagen, sometimes magnesium. And bottom line, as I'm sure the majority of the listeners will know, we don't take a supplement to grow a specific body part, and the, muscle boosting effects of creatine are fairly small. Maybe it helps get you that extra rep, and over time that does help you gain muscle. So I guess theoretically, if you are exclusively training your glutes for long term, then maybe the claim holds up.
Yeah. Now, you brought up a couple of things that I think we need to address. But before we get into that, one of the things that is striking to me about this major push to get women on creatine is there's a claim that you've debunked on the internet, but the claim is that women have 70 to 80% lower creatine levels than men. And so this is a claim that would suggest that, for every, 100 units of creatine within a male muscle, women are working with 20 or 30 units rather than 100. So, that line kind of gives the illusion of it. I would think that it implies for a given fixed standardized mass of muscle, right? Like per unit of tissue. So what is wrong with that claim? Because if you told me that and it was as I very justifiably would interpret it, saying per, a given fixed amount of muscle, women have, 20 or 30 units of creatine rather than 100. Where do we go wrong with that claim?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the marketing tactics is like, well, women need it even more. There's this unique use case for creatine for women. But as you alluded to, what they neglect to acknowledge is, 95-ish% of creatine is stored in the muscle. And on average, women have less muscle than men. And so when you think about it, if the total possibility for creatine stores is limited by the total skeletal muscle mass, then the women have a smaller cup to fill, if you will. So it really isn't a function of sex, it's a function of the size of that cup or the overall skeletal muscle mass in the body.
Yeah. And one thing that's worth noting there is that women do not have 80% less muscle than the average man. So I think you should probably address that part as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
They
that'll be a jarring difference.
Um, yeah, and I mean, so when you actually look at some of this data, like the creatine synthesis is a bit lower, but then the actual intramuscular creatine concentration is higher. Once again, going back to the overall amount of muscle. So when we think about that, this whole claim about 70 to 80% lower is sort of a warped version of this fact that the creatine synthesis is 20 to 30% lower, but that does not mean that women have 70 to 80% lower creatine levels. So I don't know exactly how or why. Well, I do actually. It was a review paper that completely misinterpreted the literature that they were citing.
No,
I
wait.
digress.
Hold up. You're telling me that someone published a statement in a narrative review paper that got through at least one peer reviewer that wasn't accurate?
That's what I'm telling you. Yeah.
Wow. So have you always been anti-science, or is this a new thing for you that you don't trust the science?
I think always, but maybe lately even more.
Yeah. Well, good for you, I guess. So yeah, it's the thing that's really annoying about this is, first of all, yeah, like don't mess up the numbers in your paper. That would be my first kind of start. But even beyond that, this is not hard. Like in terms of like what would matter in terms of telling me like, hey, this particular group has a higher need, or you could frame it differently, a higher potential for benefit from
Sure.
creatine supplementation. Don't give me, well, synthesis, and the only thing that matters is what is your kind of resting default baseline concentration in a fixed unit of muscle tissue, a fixed amount of tissue. So yeah, this is essentially a claim that is bungled in about four different four different ways, and ultimately is not not relevant, or frankly, there is such a big gap, I would say, Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't though, because I think I'm right. Um, there is such a huge gap between how this claim is often written and what it actually refers to that I think it's fair to just say it's not true, right? Like,
No, I mean it flat out isn't true. And
yeah.
so by kind of teasing apart but and looking at these studies and then trying to figure out, okay, where did this come from? Like that's sort of where I eventually got to, but it was very difficult to unpack because you kind of put in that claim and then it says yes because so many people have repeated it. But then you finally go to the root source and you say, well, it doesn't even say that.
And that is like, people, I work in higher education. I'm an educator. I'm, contributing to the next generation of bright minds and whatnot. So AI tools are kind of always at the top of mind. Anyone who's teaching a college course right now is thinking about it. Where does this fit in? What are the ethical boundaries? How is this helping my students? How is it harming them? I think one of the big harms is that like you will find a few things like if people who basically generate very low quality clickbait fitness articles and marketing copy just decide that women have 70 to 80% lower creatine levels than men per unit of muscle. At a certain point, we're all just going to go along with that because you're going to type it into a large language model. It's going to be like, oh, yeah, for sure. Everyone on the internet saying this, like, clearly this is what you're getting at. So I do have some major concern. Now, if you are an engineer at OpenAI and I'm bungling how it works, please email Lauren at frontpagefitness podcast at gmail.com. But you get the idea. It is getting harder. It's weird. It's getting paradoxically way harder to sort through some of these kind of debunkable claims once they kind of reach that point in that snowballing effect where now they're like ubiquitously made, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. And I saw this claim many, many times to the point that I was like, all right, let's really trace it back. And it was a bit of work to kind of try to find the root of this and then think,
Yeah.
okay, how did it get from the actual data to this claim? And I mean, it does happen, unfortunately, far too often. And then the problem or the end result is not just, oh, your average misinformed consumer on social media is influenced. It's that there are plenty of educated people with larger platforms or patients or clients who are then adopting this narrative as well.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Lauren, one of the things that came up previously, you were talking about gummies, not the fun kind. We're talking about gummies with creatine. So I saw one of your recent posts, and it said that 4 of the 6 most popular creatine gummies on Amazon contained virtually no creatine. And I was looking at them. I mean, they had like literally just about none within them. So I'm bringing it up right now. So yeah, we're talking about one of them advertised 5 grams and had 6.3. Good on you. That's 1.3 free grams of creatine for anyone keeping score at home. The other ones were 0.0, 0.0, and then the other ones were less than 0.03. So we're talking about trace amounts of creatine. And again, these were all advertising a 5-gram serving size. So, and I should have mentioned the other one, the 6th one claimed 4.5 and had 4.59. So 2 of them were legit. 4 of them were extremely non-legit. That's not a small miss in terms of the target dose. So, have you looked in to why this is, or are you just kind of generally steering people away from gummies as the delivery vehicle?
I think if this is not just creatine, when we see this actually with multivitamins and melatonin, just other
Mm.
forms of supplements that were traditionally delivered in a capsule form or for creatine a powder form and are now being kind of translated into a gummy form. And when
What
you
about
look
the
at,
gummies that the young people are using that have like a whole forest worth of THC packed into every single gummy? Would that fall under this umbrella?
I think it would actually, because it really all comes down to the same issue in terms of dosing appropriately. And then we have to think about the shelf stability. So is it actually degrading over time? And I know that in the multivitamin world, when you look at, okay, it's supposed to have 13 different ingredients, and then you try to actually measure them all. And some of them end up, like in this case, very underdosed. And so the solution has been to intentionally overdose some of these ingredients such that when you measure them now, you'll see, oh, okay, there's actually 5 times more folate in this than there should be, or 8 times more iodine in this than there should be. And so it's kind of a problem either way. And when you think about actually creating a gummy and all of the components involved in that, then it's a challenge to get these ingredients in there in a way that is evenly distributed, meaning every single gummy in that bottle is dosed the same, and again that it's going to hold up over time.
Yeah, yeah. I was kind of thinking through that. I actually had a student ask me about this a while ago, and the things that came to mind with me, because I remember looking into this with multivitamins, because yeah, some of the independent testing was terrible for the vitamins, and you're like, this seems weird. We've had the multivitamin problem solved for a long time. I remember the Flintstone chewables that I had as a kid. Those worked well back then. So I was looking into the gummies, and some of these gummy products, what they do is they basically just make a little gummy bear, and then they do a topical application of the
Yeah.
actual ingredients. And so I mean, go buy a thing of gummies, everything is clumped together, right? And so like as you're pulling these apart, you're like, do you really feel like you're evenly distributing these topically applied vitamins? Probably not the case. So the topical thing is an issue. Even if it's not topical, there's the whole idea of mixing it within the gelatin before it actually cools and mixing it evenly. And with that, one of the things that I can't help but wonder about with creatine is, and I could be wrong about this, I'd have to dig a little deeper, but creatine is reasonably stable as a dry powder, but it is very susceptible to degradation from heat. And so I do wonder, what is the heat that they're using as they make these gelatin mixtures before they mold them and cool them? I'd be curious to see how much that could play a role in some of the degradation of this creatine. So to me, it'd be really interesting to see not just the creatine content in these gummies, but also the creatinine content, and to see that over a period of time to get at what you're talking about with the potential shelf life issues. So yeah, creatine, there's all sorts of information about its stability as a dry powder, its stability in water, its stability at different temperatures, at different pHs. But I haven't seen a paper that's like, creatine suspended in a gummy for 6 months. I have no idea. It's a very unique thing to look into. So I think it's certainly some more research needed there. And, to be fair, there's other things that can come up with these. Sometimes people see that a gummy's underdosed from a company or any supplement, and they'll just think it's just a scam. I don't think that's as likely with creatine because creatine is such a cheap raw material relative to other supplements. That's like the weirdest scam to pull, is to underdose creatine. Like it's a very strange thing to do. Um, and one other thing that can come up sometimes is issues with the analytical approach to the third party testing. Like, in theory, when you are testing for the presence of some chemical, there's always the theoretical potential that the actual assay or procedure you're using is not appropriate. But the fact that 2 out of the 6 came back like pretty on the money would lead me to believe that's probably not going on here either. So, yeah, it's a lot to think about with creatine gummies. And I don't know about you, Lauren, but for me, I would say just keep it simple. Go with the powder. If you want to dry scoop it, go for it. That's fine. But the powder, I think, is still going to be the way to go. And whenever you can, you mix it right around the time you're going to consume it, just so it's not sitting out and degrading over time.
Yeah, and also not to mention the fact that you're paying quite a bit more for the gummy product that may or may not actually contain the creatine you hope it will.
Yeah. Now, Lauren, everything we've talked about, I had outlined as of yesterday morning, but then something very tragic happened. Uh,
You went
I,
on Instagram?
against my better judgment, I went on Instagram and you know what? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to like put his name in the title and put a big picture of him and do all the flashy nonsense, low hanging fruit marketing stuff. But I came across a post by one Dr. Andrew Huberman about creatine. And the opening words, I believe, by memory, were, I want to talk about creatine. I thought, Eric, skip it. Eric, move on. Move on with your life. But I didn't, Lauren. And so this one hurt me a lot because there were a couple things that we just have to get ahead of, and it's not going to work. we're going to try to get ahead of it, and it's too late because we're going to say it to 14 people, and he just said it to 14 million. Um, but Laura, do you want to tell me which part of it you found to be most, which one had you most concerned in the sense that you're like, great, I'm going to be answering questions about this for the next 6 months?
Well, I think on a recent episode of our podcast, Front Page Fitness, I'd mentioned that the idea of creatine cycling was back, and there were people saying, oh, you should uh, start with a loading phase and then go into a daily kind of maintenance phase and then cycle off of it for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, some arbitrary number based on nothing. Um, and I mean, what we know about the efficacy of creatine is that you need to take it consistently in order, once those stores are saturated, then we need to maintain them, and that's why if there's going to be an effect, that's how we're getting an effect. But it reminds me of cycling off caffeine or something where you're resensitizing and then you come back, and after taking a month off caffeine, then you have that first cup of coffee and you're like, wow, this is an amazing caffeine buzz. But it just doesn't work that way for creatine. So I think that's where they're kind of missing the mark. And he was sort of saying the same thing. Not quite for that reason, but more to um, with the argument that if you go off of it and then you cycle back on, then you'll be able to really evaluate whether that dose is still working for you and are you still able to experience those same benefits. And one of the biggest issues with that is for the vast majority of people, the benefits of creatine are imperceptible. So you're um I don't know that this is actually a useful exercise, because you're basically saying, all right, I've been doing this thing that maybe it's working, or maybe I've just been consistently lifting and therefore I've been getting a little stronger, or I'm seeing some visible muscle, and then you go off creatine. It's not like, oh, all of that is going away. It reminds me of if you were to like cycle off PEDs and then say, okay, like, yeah, you are going to notice a difference visually, performance wise. Makes sense. But for creatine, it's not in that same category.
Yeah, I think to me the part that really hurt my heart uh, is like, I don't know. As I get older, I'm very intrigued of watching content creators and trying to get an assessment. Not like, it's not just like the superficial, what did they say and do I agree with it? But sometimes I like to try to think through, like, how does this person think? Like what is their internal process to identifying a problem, acquiring information, and then offering a resolution to that problem. And in this case, I was just so hurt that the rationale, as you were talking about, is basically every so often I like to completely do a washout phase from creatine, get back to baseline, see what my baseline is like, and then start over. And aside from like the utility of doing that, my thought process is a scientist would say, there have been many crossover trials with creatine done. Crossover trials do washout periods. How long does literally every creatine study do washout for in order to actually wash out its effects? And the answer is 4 to 6 weeks. So to me, I was just like, it is what is happening here? Where we're just going to pretend that 1 week washout is this like completely arbitrary number, and we're like, oh yeah, I'm sure that'll do it. And I refuse to look into the massive volume of research describing exactly how long it takes for creatine to wash out. I think to me that one hurt me at a personal level, Lauren. And I try not to let my personal feelings get into this stuff, but that set me back.
Yeah, another comment that he made was, well, particularly for women or smaller women, they'll notice spillover under the skin.
Yeah.
And I was like, what now?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Like I know a lot of bodybuilders who are like, yeah, I don't take it during peak week because I don't need it during peak week, and if there is any kind of extra water retention or stomach bloating or whatever, like why risk it when you're trying to nail down the granular details and every little thing matters, you know? But if we really want to get down to it, and I think I probably will write an article about this soon. Um, we're talking about, okay, you're taking in, let's say in this case, it's not a bodybuilding show, this is just day-to-day stuff, right? You're taking in 5 grams of something. And this is distributing across your entire body. And will it pull in some water? Will it be stored with water? Sure. But like, how many liters of water do you think it's gonna pull with it as 5 grams, right? And then the other thing about creatine is, um, what happens if you're born with a deficiency of creatine transporters? You have catastrophic issues. Like it is a major, major genetic condition that fundamentally alters your life. The reason being, creatine its molecular properties are such that it cannot just diffuse wherever it wants to go. And so, what percentage of the 5 grams could possibly be getting into the subcutaneous area, kind of into that interstitial fluid? It's just a completely physiological, like nonsensical idea that you're going to have substantial subcutaneous fluid. I don't know how the creatine got there. I'm open to the belief that maybe there are some small, small, small number of transporters that might exist. But yeah, it's the idea that a person who's not literally about to walk on stage could visibly detect subcutaneous water retention from a 5 gram dose of creatine is the most implausible thing I've ever heard. And the second most implausible thing I've ever heard is that it will change if you drop to 3. Like, what are we talking about? We can calculate grams and molecules and liters. We can, all this stuff fits together. We can actually kind of map it out. And it just, the surface area of a human body, it turns out, is large relative to a 5 gram dose of water. When we know that the vast majority of it is going straight to muscle, some will go to brain, some will go to kidney, some will go to liver. Some will just go through the bloodstream and then ultimately get degraded to creatinine and leave. It'll never leave the vascular space. So I just don't understand how we have this leftover amount that's making it to the interstitial area or the subcutaneous area via interstitial fluid and causing
And
this.
hanging out there in perpetuity.
Oh, and fundamental, and now your dresses don't fit. like what are we talking about? This is insanity. So yeah, it was just a rough night for me, Lauren. And then like again, I want people to have a good time. Everyone have their fun. But man, when you're watching that kind of discourse go down, and then like not half, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but there's like so many comments of like, hell yeah, this is why I love science. I'm like, guys, science is not happening here. There is no science in the neighborhood of this conversation right now. But yeah, it was a
Yeah,
tough one.
I
I
think
think we took a big L.
when you have you are a scientist or you are a physician and then you have a platform that's huge, then everything you say is taken as scientific or medically relevant or and hopefully, or I mean not hopefully, it's not happening. People aren't being responsible
But
in that sense.
here's what I have to give credit though. I have to give credit. Huberman in his post probably if you it was a long video, especially for that format. I didn't even know you could do them that long. But he basically I could check the transcript maybe on 4 occasions basically said like I'm not saying this based on data or science or anything of the sort. This is just stuff I'm telling you based on vibes. Even though it was usually about things for which there is ample data. It was just like
Right.
for reasons I won't explain. I'm not going to use any of that shit. I'm just going to tell you what I feel from my gut. And
Right.
even still, like I had to give him some credit in the sense that I think he went out of his way to work in those caveats, and people just did not accept them. And people were just like, "Hell yeah, this is good science." So there's nothing he can do about that.
Yeah, but you should know that's how your content is interpreted. So
Probably
just don't
so.
say it. Like just
And
don't.
hey, like you do kind of ask for it when like so like we like have a little themed podcast, front page fitness. Front page. We teach talk about it or treat it as if it's kind of like a little news headline thing. But no one, we never purport to be journalists, right? So I think we can get away with that safely. But like, yeah, when you do call your when you put the word lab in the name of your podcast, like it is just saying like, please view everything I do within kind of a scientific lens. So I do think that is kind of asking for it to some extent. But anyway, Lauren, hopefully, aside from us, being a little bit devastated and pouring one out for science last night, hopefully this conversation was reasonably helpful to people out there. Because listen, most of the iron cult knows a lot of this stuff about creatine, but they talk to people who don't, right? And so now you can be equipped to discuss some of these myths, and folks, they're going to be coming in harder and more frequently than they have ever before. Because yeah, cycling is making a comeback. The water retention stuff, I'm sure, is going to get huge. So everyone brace for it and the way you brace for it is by reviewing, what does this actually mean scientifically? Lauren, there's a whole grab bag of topics here, and obviously we're not going to get to all of them. But one of the things that I think is kind of a big misconception that you've been posting about a lot is bone health. And when I say health, I mean, bone mineral content, bone density, bone durability, or, resilience with regards to fracture risk. And a lot of people, and I'm sure you can find a clip of me saying somewhere something along these lines, but a lot of people talk about how you need to lift heavy to, to facilitate better bone health or to induce bone adaptations. And if you go back to textbooks, I used to teach a textbook where we would go through kind of skeletal anatomy and bone physiology. And it is true, like if you want to get a bone to really adapt to force applied to it, you have to exceed this kind of, I believe the term is minimal essential strain. Like you do have to actually uh, have a robust enough stimulus to actually induce, the adaptation to deposit, to induce those changes and modifications in bone content and bone density, and even the alignment of the bone tissue in a way that makes it more resilient and robust to fractures. But anyway, Lauren, this is an area where people keep saying over and over, you have to lift heavy and really, really, really heavy. And you have taken it upon yourself to clear the adjust the record, I guess. What's the phrase I'm looking for? To correct the record about how you can lift for bone adaptation. So do you mind giving a quick rundown of where this myth goes wrong and what you really need to do in order to facilitate bone health?
Yeah, I think to start, I'll say that our exercise literature for bone is nowhere near as robust as it is for muscle. And the reason for that is bone adaptations, measurable bone adaptations, take way longer than
Yeah.
measurable muscle adaptations. And so we need studies that are at least 8 months, if not a year. And it's difficult to conduct trials like that. So I think at this point, we're sort of in this situation where we see a lot of things kind of work for bone, and I don't know that we're in a position to say this is the thing or this is the optimal thing.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is that's important to point out is we care about bone mineral density as a proxy for fracture risk.
Right.
And if you don't fall, then you don't fracture. So part of this is also building a body that is resilient such that we aren't at risk of falling as much. And so incorporating exercises, whether they are specifically balance exercises by design or whether there's something that incorporates balance, like a walking lunge is an example of that. But when we actually look at kind of percentage of 1 rep max type data, the study that is most often cited for why people need to lift heavy for bone is a trial called Lift More. And this was a study where they had a group perform 5x5 barbell squats, deadlifts, and overhead press, and also do these hard landing jumps. So, not box jumps. These are jumps where you're hanging from a pull up bar and then trying to land as hard as possible, keeping your legs as straight as possible for kind of maximal impact on the bone. So we have one group doing that, and then we have another group doing an at-home body weight program that, by the own researchers' admission, was not designed to elicit any adaptations in terms of bone. So
Well, because I mean, sorry to interrupt, but it's important to highlight, like, if you gave me an at-home body weight training program and I was trying to induce like robust bone adaptations, like, it's worth noting that, like, I've been training hard and consistently since I was 12. And I don't know how many tricks I have up my sleeve putting together like a really good, well executed body weight at home workout. So, like, asking a novice or even intermediate trained person, be like, yeah, just go do like a really incredible strength building workout with no equipment. That is a huge ask. And like you're saying, essentially guarantees that you are not going to be inducing very considerable adaptations there.
right. And so, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they might as well have just been a control group. They were very much treated as a control group. But, anyone who's done human subject research knows that it's much easier to, or it's much better in terms of participant retention when you give them something to do. So even if it's stretching or if it's some kind of counseling or something, so they don't feel like I'm the group that's doing nothing, I'm getting no benefit from this study. So anyway, not at all surprisingly, there were beneficial adaptations realized by the group that was doing the heavy lifting and the jumping. Now, all that tells us is that exercise is better, or resistance exercise, whether it's the lifting or the jumping, is better than not. What it doesn't tell us is, could we have seen similar results with moderate or lighter load lifting? And to what extent was it the resistance training versus these hard landing jumps? Just a comment on the hard landing jumps. I do not think this is an appropriate recommendation for most people to be hanging from a pull-up bar and trying to land as hard as possible with your legs as straight as possible. That's not an exercise I will be ever incorporating into my own program. Not sure about you, but
Well, especially when it's like, hey, Dr. Lauren, I'm very, very, very concerned about my fracture risk. So I was about to undergo a training program. How do you think about me doing this? Yeah, that's probably like literally, like you were saying, like with fracture risk, there is number one, what is the durability of your bone tissue itself? And number two, what kind of scenarios are you in that may lead you to actually sustaining a fall that could lead to a fracture. So yeah, you probably, like, again, like in one of the double-edged swords, the kind of tricky things is, you alluded to, uh, training that has a balance component, and that, you have to be very realistic about where you're at in terms of your balance and how to do that safely with adequate safeguards in place. But yeah, it's like, if you're going around there saying like, hey, I'm going to market my fitness content to like 58-year-old women who have never trained in their life, and then say like, hey, have you thought about doing extremely high risk plyometric type exercises? It's like, it's literally, they would honestly, for their long-term fracture risk, it would, I'm going to get like destroyed for this. It would probably be better for them to do nothing. Right?
yeah.
Like just don't put yourself in these situations where you are clearly going to hurt your bones.
Well, not only that, but any sort of injury that would prevent you from being physically active for a long period of time is
Yeah.
going to be way more detrimental.
Yeah.
So, like, the risk benefit ratio there is definitely something to consider. I mean, the same would go for a sprinting program for someone who has never done any sort of running.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Well,
not a good idea.
can I tell a story about that briefly? I'm sorry to sidetrack us, but when I was like in like deep in a bodybuilding prep a long time, this was probably 2013. Um, I was so sick. This was back when everybody was doing those like modified wind gates for their cardio, and it was just bike sprint after bike sprint, just nauseating. Like literally, like if you're going to design a program to try to make someone vomit, it was that. Uh, and this one day I was just like, I can't do them today. Like I'm so sick of this, and I'm in like the part of prep where it's like far enough from the beginning to be brutal, but not close enough to the end where I can really see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I was like, you know what? It's summer. There's a cool, like, there's a track over there in my town I can use. I'm going to do some like actual running sprints. And I was like, but I'm smart. I know that I've been a bodybuilder for a long time now and not an athlete. So I did the most over the top, ridiculous, tedious warm up. I must have been warming up for like 45 minutes. And then I think probably on the second step of my first sprint, I pulled my groin. And in the middle of prep, and I was just like, I was very adamant that I would not do this. Like I could I could not have done a more gratuitous over the top warm up, and it did literally nothing for me. It was just 45 minutes of my life gone, and then a pulled groin in less than a second. So,
Yeah.
cautionary tale there. But anyway, Lauren, as you were.
So that is definitely the most commonly cited study, this one trial, which again tells us that lifting and or those jumps was better than doing some at-home program. But there are other studies showing that moderate loads, like 65% one rep max, can improve bone density. There's one systematic review that found like moderate was even better than heavy and light. And then there's another meta-analysis that determined loads as light as 40% 1RM can improve bone mineral density. There's a lot of limitations here in how you pool together this literature, as there always is in a meta-analysis, but particularly for the bone literature, because they really tend to do studies that are very, very different methodologically and also in terms of outcome measure. So as I said, in the beginning of this discussion, we really need those long-term trials. And so if you're seeing studies that are shorter term, but they're using some sort of proxy, like a blood marker of bone turnover, like that's interesting, but it's not necessarily predictive of a longer term outcome. And the magnitude of that increase or decrease, depending on that marker, it can't tell us, like, okay, what would we expect on a percentage basis from a DEXA a year from now.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit messy, but I think at this point, what we can say is what seems to work for muscle, meaning you can train at a variety of loads as long as we're close enough to failure, also looks like it's going to be effective for bone. And since most older individuals who care about their long-term health, longevity, etc., should care about preserving muscle, then to me, it seems like a no-brainer to just recommend resistance training and overall physical activity. But when you start to mix in this message, like you have to be jumping or you have to be lifting really, really heavy, then I think we often end up discouraging people from kind of doing anything fitness oriented, because if you're an older person who cares about their health, who has never done any exercise like this, all of those things sound incredibly intimidating. And it's interesting that there's this whole movement of Vonda Wright. She's been everywhere recently. She published a book. She's an orthopedic surgeon, and her kind of tagline is "bash your bones." And so she hosts these big seminars where, like everyone in the audience is gonna jump together. Um, And it's catchy, it's marketable, I get it, but there's no evidence that we need to be jumping. And importantly, those hard landing jumps I described earlier are dissimilar to your typical plyometrics where you're landing in a deep squat and actually it's not the bone that's absorbing all that impact. A lot of it is muscle and connective tissue. So the idea that that would be great for bone is really up in the air. So I say if you love jumping, then go for it. But I don't think we have evidence to suggest it's required for bone. And as we discussed, we need to weigh the risks involved.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know it sounds really counterintuitive, but just to clarify, the studies you've looked at, especially like I think you mentioned a meta-analysis or a systematic review in the mix there. Usually what they're looking at probably I'm thinking is bone mineral density and bone mineral content. Is that correct?
Typically, yes.
Yeah.
But the
So
issue is that some studies try to do that, and then the trial wasn't long enough to
right.
really elicit those outcomes. So you say, "Oh, there's no result," but it's not really a fair like
Yeah.
if you're
No,
doing it
it's
for 3 months and you didn't find anything, it doesn't say, "Oh, that intervention didn't work." It's like that was an inappropriate intervention and study length to assess the outcome of interest.
yeah, yeah. And this came up when I was writing my article for the next issue of Mass that's coming out October 1st. But I was talking about if you're doing some kind of nutritional intervention that's supposed to have a big impact on some extremely slow turnover protein in the body, it can't be a 4-week study, right? Like it makes no sense to believe that 4 weeks of this or 4 weeks of that is going to make a big deal when you've got these proteins that turn over extremely slowly. So one of the downsides of kind of like practical resistance training research studies is that we've become totally accustomed to saying 8 weeks is good, 12 weeks is great, because we're used to muscle adaptations. And the reason those are considered good and great is because they are the shortest possible interventions where you can feel kind of okay about assessing like, big picture muscle adaptations, at the macro level in terms of muscle size. And so it's really important to recognize that we cannot translate that timeline over and say, well, that makes a good study for looking at bone content or bone density as well. So yeah, you're right. Like a lot of those shorter ones are going to naturally be biased toward null effects without question. Um, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, that doesn't make sense. Like when you watch someone do plyometrics and jumping and you say, that looks like it's hard on their bones. But then you look at someone doing a biceps curl machine and you're like, that does not look hard on somebody's bones, right? But it is important to recognize that, when we're talking about forces on the bone, I mean, there is, certainly muscle pulls on tendon, which pulls on bone at that tendinous junction there. In addition, there are compressive forces as the muscles are actually contracting during resistance training. So there are other sources of force working on the bones other than just the gravity of landing and impact. So I think that might help some people start to wrap their head around, some of these less intuitive findings. It's much more intuitive to think if you want to put force on bone, jump, land, or put on really heavy weight, and kind of, crush yourself under it, metaphorically speaking. So important to recognize that stuff. One thing I will leave as I'm curious to get your opinion on this because, when you talk about fracture risk, we could say, and I'm huge caveat, I'm not a bone expert. I, know a little, enough to be dangerous probably. But when we talk about fracture risk, of course, we're talking about bone characteristics at the big picture, right? Bone mineral density, bone mineral content. And we'll focus on density, right? It makes more sense. So you want to have dense bone. I think we would agree. And if bone density gets below a certain point, you're clearly at a high risk for fracture. Another factor would be what circumstances are you creating such that you may sustain some kind of impact to that bone, which could cause a fracture, right? So that is more balance and all those just kind of situational factors. So do you frequently walk through a home that has a lot of things that are easy to trip over? That is a huge factor for fracture risk. One other thing that I think, and you may disagree, I'm curious to hear your opinion, but I have heard nerds who are not me talking about, kind of a more refined look at at bone structure when it comes to, I think you could vaguely use the term like the microarchitecture, right? So how the actual components of that bone tissue are aligned and how they all fit together. And so one thing I would be curious about, there's kind of multiple questions in my mind that are on the table. Number one, can light or low load, let's call it low load training or moderate load training, both of them, can they positively impact bone mineral density? I think it's pretty safe to say that the answer is yes, right? So better than nothing, positive effect observed. One thing I am curious about is for when you're talking about taking it to that next level up there, is it possible that some of these really high impact type activities might confer additional benefit, particularly when it comes to the kind of micro architecture of the bone and its kind of internal geometry. So I am kind of curious to see how that might play a role, but I think that probably has a lot more relevance when it comes to athletes who are doing very high impact sports and are expecting kind of multi-directional, multi-planar loading on all sorts of bones, moving all sorts of ways and really high forces. So I don't think that's necessarily relevant to, I'm a 62-year-old woman with low bone density at baseline. I'm just trying to reduce my fracture risk. But I'm not, I guess what I'm saying is I'm not quite ready to say that there is no further benefit of, like for a young person who's highly active, a more robust training program that has all sorts of loading and a bunch of different planes and cutting and jumping and things of that nature compared to just like, we'll get you on the leg press and leg extension for some sets of 30. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I think first we don't know how to really compare these all because we need a study that actually had a heavy load group and a moderate load group and a lighter load. Like that would be a great start, and that doesn't exist right now. All we're left is kind of comparing different trials, and there's some issues there.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'll note is when you think about repetitive impact, like running, for example, you might think, well, logically, that should be good, right? But for somebody who already has issues with bone density, there's actually some argument why that's not the greatest move because you're getting that kind of repetitive stress. And when we think about the types of outcomes that we want to see improvements in with bone is these locations where you're more likely to start to lose it. And so the hip is really common. The lumbar spine is another kind of site of interest when you start doing these regional DEXs. And if we're going to target the bones in the hip as well as possible or in a most well-rounded way, then it does stand to reason that we would want, just as we would for muscle, to kind of work in different planes and perform a variety of exercises such that we are kind of targeting it from different angles. We are getting the muscle to pull on the bone in different ways.
Yeah.
And then I think hopefully not only are we hoping to either preserve or build bone, that's another really important caveat. We kind of peak in our bone mass in our mid-20s typically. So the rest of your adult life is trying to preserve what you have rather than trying to build. So I think there's that. And then you mentioned fracture risk, but I think the other thing that you sort of alluded to is fall risk, because if we are able to fall well, then that's one thing, right? My mom does a lot of hiking, challenging hikes, and she went to her endocrinologist the other month, and I said, are you falling at all? And she's like, yeah, I fall all the time. When I'm doing these challenging hikes, like I fall on the trail because you're stepping over this or that. But because she's doing that regularly, then she's not at risk for fracture the same way because she knows how to catch herself. And so I think when when a fall is catastrophic, it's when somebody loses their balance, doesn't catch themselves when they fall, and then all of a sudden there's this really big break. So obviously fracture risk is important, but then it's all of those other things you're doing to prevent the fall from happening in the first place. And if you are going to fall, how bad is the potential outcome?
Yeah. No, for sure. Definitely. Now I was just Googling something to do some kind of live fact checking of some thoughts I had coming up. And, sometimes you Google, you get some less relevant things that come up. But I saw a paper from 2020, and the first sentence is most fatal human skull injuries occur under impact loading conditions. So, what protocol do you recommend for building up the durability of the skull bone? Are you using low loads? Are you doing repetitive head against the wall type movements, or do you just leave that one alone and play your luck?
Yeah, well, I think if you spend enough time on social media, then you'll probably be inspired to start banging your head against the wall. So
Yeah.
that's a good motivating
Oh, for
tool.
sure. Yeah. No, it's a good point that you had though. Like when I was still a competitive wrestler, there's, you're going live, which means you're just wrestling and doing your best, trying to win. But there's also a period of practice called drilling where you let your partner just do their moves and you're kind of giving them a good look, putting up a little fight, but not too much. And yeah, like it's kind of one of those weird things. You never set out to like necessarily get good at falling. But I started to notice when I first got into wrestling, I was like, oh, I'm so good at falling, because like you're falling from so many different situations and scenarios with different, yeah. So definitely it's kind of an overlooked skill that gets way more important as you get older. So
The
yeah,
same thing with being able to fail under a barbell, right? Like,
sure,
if
yeah,
you don't know how to bail out of a squat, you could have a really catastrophic injury. So if someone's doing a lot of really heavy lifting without a spotter, then learning that skill can be really helpful.
yeah, for sure. One last thing I wanted to ask here when it comes to bone. Is there any dietary support that you think people should really be considering, or is it really just a matter of, appropriate loading, attenuating fall risk to the extent you can? Like, is there any new stuff when it comes to protein, calcium, vitamin D as it pertains to kind of facilitating bone remodeling while you're training?
I mean, a lot of these studies will often include a vitamin D calcium supplement, sort of just because. But it sort of seems like, although that might be important, not necessarily supplemental, but just sufficient overall when you're in development, like that's probably when it matters most because that is when we're actually building the bone, laying the foundation for the rest of our adulthood. So, like, is it going to harm you? No, but there are plenty people who have done all the right things in terms of physical activity and adequate nutrition in young adulthood, in middle adulthood, and then they get to a certain age and you just end up in that situation where you are starting to lose bone mass. And there's a huge genetic component to that. But fortunately, there are some pretty effective meds. And so if you're somebody who is experiencing that and then you're able to get with an endocrinologist, then there are some meds that can increase bone mineral density by 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4% in a given year, which is pretty huge. Like that's substantial. Um, and so it's cool that we have that available to us, given that unlike muscle, where you can kind of start at any age and still build some or kind of be able to preserve bone, it's sort of like there's less, it's less in our control. There's a huge genetic component, and although physical activity and diet are important, they just don't seem to be enough for a lot of people.
Yeah, good to know. Now, Lauren, the last thing I want to ask you about, and this is just personal. I can cut this from the show if I need to, but I am worried about you. For people who are watching on video right now, you are wearing a completely nondescript kind of baggy black sweatshirt, and you're back in the hat. And this is for folks who can't see it. This is a completely nondescript, fully logoless black baseball cap. And so, Lauren, once again, Last time you wore this, I questioned whether or not you might be an undercover cop. Now I'm thinking more you're on the run. And so I guess my question is, are you on the run, and when will this stop and you'll finally just turn yourself in?
This is the same hat, but it's not black. This is kind of a steel blue color, actually.
You're never going to beat the nondescript logoless black hat allegations. Not this time.
Well, when I wore the black one, it looked like I was wearing kind of this hat that had this wide brim because of the back of my chair. So I decided that I could never do that again on camera.
That's true. You do have a contrast this time. So yeah, that is not happening.
I'm wearing the hat because I need to wash my hair. It's kind of greasy.
Okay. But you're not in danger. You're not running from anything. You haven't broken any major crimes.
It's a Lululemon hat, and Lululemon doesn't typically have extremely visible logos. And while we're insulting each other's senses of fashion, maybe you need to get a second hat because I have never seen you wear a hat that isn't the Duke hat. Do you have multiple?
Oh yeah. No, I have right now I have 4 Duke hats.
And they're all the same.
2 are the same. 2 are this black with the blue logo. 1 is blue with the blue logo, which I'm sure you've seen, but I think you've mentally kind of stored it away as the same hat because it is the same hat, just a different color. And then I have another one that's a larger logo, which is actually black and blue, but I don't believe I've worn it on air. That's my going out hat.
Oh, okay. It looks fancy.
When I wear a tuxedo, that is the baseball cap that I put on. Yeah. So so there's a complex system. Basically I wear hats every day, and then eventually I'll be like, I need to wash a hat. So you have to have like a rotation so that you're not washing all your hats at once. There's a lot going on in my life. It's busy. Lauren, is there anything else that you feel like you need to get off your chest before we depart? I do want to congratulate you, or I guess commend you. So folks on Iron Culture don't know this, but there was recently a bit of an issue. Lauren, you and I had a pretty public spat, I think, related to social media. Basically, someone asked you on your massive platform, like, are there any people that you recommend as just like decent human beings who have reliable evidence-based fitness information? You proceeded to tag 15 accounts, none of which being mine. And people rushed into my inbox. People rushed into your inbox. I'm sure that is that why you're on the run right now? Is because of the backlash? You're just in hiding? We'll never know. But I want to thank you because we both commented very skeptically on the Andrew Huberman post that we talked about earlier. And I think that you very performatively had my back. And I know it's overcompensation, but I appreciate it as a positive gesture.
Thank you. Yeah,
So
it really came for me.
Our feud, in my eyes, I don't know about my followers, my legion of fans, but in my eyes, our feud is over publicly. Okay. I have forgiven but not forgotten. And as listeners of Front Page Fitness know, I will still call upon you for that one favor of any magnitude at any time in the remainder of your and my life.
I look forward to that for sure.
Okay, Lauren, like I was getting to, anything else you want to say to the good people before we go?
Yeah, check out our podcast and tell, what was it, 150,000 of your closest friends? Yeah,
if everyone brings in 150,000 new listeners, we may be one of the larger podcasts in our niche.
So we would appreciate that.
We would. It's called Front Page Fitness. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you find Iron Culture. How do I know that? Because I upload all of them. So wherever you get this, make sure you go subscribe to Front Page Fitness. If you listen to a lot of extremely science-heavy podcasts, this one's a bit of a change up, slightly different tone, a little change of pace, but certainly still rigorous, evidence-based with a little bit of extra. It's a little lighter, wouldn't you say?
It is. I mean, you and I are on podcasts all the time, keeping it serious. So we needed a platform to just be ourselves.
Yeah, good to be yourself. Now, folks, last thing I want to say before we get out of here, make sure you support our good friends at Elite FTS. They support us. You support them. It's a good ecosystem and environment. So when you have any needs, you need bands, you need equipment for the gym, you need wrist wraps, you need straps, you need just apparel Whatever you may need, the people over at Elite FTS, Dave Tate and company, are good people. Be sure you support them. Head over to elitefts.com and use our code MRR10 for a 10% discount off most products. That does it for us. Iron Culture, thank you so much for listening. As always, make sure you like, rate, subscribe, review, share it with a friend. And if you really love what we're doing, you could always subscribe to the Mass Research Review. We've got a doozy of an issue coming out in about 2 weeks on October 1st. So you want to make sure you subscribe by then. But yeah, really appreciate everybody. I believe at some point in the future, Eric Helms will be back. When will that be? I have no idea. He blocked my phone number. I can't find his social media profile, so I'm assuming I'm blocked there as well. But if he ever comes back into the fold, I will let you know, and I will do my best to bring him back on. So everyone take care, and someone will be back with a new episode in 7 days.